You're listening to Nocturnal Nightmares. While the world sleeps peacefully, we open the door to what lies beneath. The stories that surface in silence, the fears that rise in the dark. These are not dreams, they are reminders. Stay with us. And don't close your eyes just yet. The sun, a molten coin dropping behind the serrated edge of pines, painted the late afternoon sky as Elias eased his truck to a halt beside the cabin. A tremor of disquiet vibrated in his chest the moment his boots hit the needle-strewn earth. Wind sighed through the high branches, a sibilant murmur that slithered just past hearing, like a confidence shared inches from his ear. He scanned the perimeter. Only the dense weave of trunks, the restless sway of boughs. A deep inhalation, a forced shrug against the chill crawling up his spine. And he began unloading. Solitude was the prescription. He needed to swallow it whole. He hefted boxes into the diminutive living space. The cabin breathed age, floorboards worn smooth by forgotten footsteps. A hearth of river stones standing cold and sentinel. Dust motes danced in the slanted light, piercing windows filmed with the cataracts of disuse. Bags slumped near the couch as he prowled, taking inventory. The kitchen, spare and functional, held a small table huddled in one corner, its narrow window framing tall bleached grass and yet more pines receding into the distance. Quiet settled, a welcome wait. Hours dissolved into the rhythm of organizing. Plates finding homes in cupboards, tins stacking neatly in the pantry. As daylight bled away, the interior gathered shadows. A single lamp cast a frail pool of amber in the living room before he stepped back outside, drawn to the deepening twilight. The sky deepened to an bruised indigo. The tree line became a solid black slash against it. Another gust agitated the branches. A thread of sound, thinner than a whisper, seemed to ride the air currents. Goose flesh pebbled his arms. His heart gave a startled kick against his ribs, but the woods offered no visible disturbance. He compelled himself to stillness, absorbing the view for a long minute, then retreated inside. The click of the lock unnaturally loud. Sleep offered little refuge. The mattress was unforgiving, and the old structure groaned around him, a skeleton settling. Around 2, his eyes snapped open, convinced of movement outside. He held his breath, listening intently, catching only the wind's soft insistence under the eaves. A parched throat drove him from bed into the kitchen's deeper gloom. Moonlight, filtering through the grimy panes, laid a pale rectangle on the floorboards. He stood there, sipping water, enveloped by darkness, his skin prickling with an undefined anticipation, as if waiting for something coiled in the corners to spring. Just nerves, he reasoned, the static hum of displacement. Back in bed, sleep eventually reclaimed him, thin and troubled. Morning arrived crisp and bright, sunlight spilling generously, a welcome absolution. After breakfast, he ventured out to explore the property. The cabin occupied a small clearing, encircled by dense forest, pressing in on all sides, boots crunched over twigs and dry needles, as he walked towards the tallest pines standing sentinel near the property line. He registered small tracks in the soft earth. Deer, perhaps, though their spacing struck him as peculiar. He trailed them briefly until they vanished into a tussock of coarse grass. Deeper within the wood's embrace, scattered tree stumps, ancient and weathered, punctuated the undergrowth. On one, strange markings caught his eye. Incised lines, weathered smooth, forming patterns that defied logic yet hinted at intention. He traced the grooves. They felt silken, honed by countless passes of blade or chisel. The earlier unease resurfaced, a cold bloom in his stomach. He became aware of the profound silence. No bird song, no scuttling of unseen creatures, only the ceaseless passage of wind through the canopy. He turned back towards the cabin after an hour, a faint throb starting behind his temples, his breath coming quicker than his unhurried pace warranted. Relaxation, he told himself. A book, perhaps. Settle in. He sank onto the couch, cracked open a paperback, but the quiet pressed in, immense and watchful, as if the very air held its breath. The urge to fill it with music warred with his purpose for coming here, to acclimate to this profound stillness. Later, drawn again to the outdoors, he found the wind had gathered strength, rushing through the pines with a low, hollow roar. Standing on the porch, the unmistakable sensation of being observed prickled the back of his neck, tightening his shoulders. He scanned the tree line, eyes probing the shifting mosaic of light and shadow. For an instant, he perceived a density in the dappled gloom between two trunks, a stillness that didn't belong, humanoid, half-veiled. He stared, pulse quickening, but a branch dipped, a curtain of needles swayed, and the impression dissolved like smoke. He descended the steps, compelled to investigate, moving closer, each footfall echoing the frantic beat in his chest. Reaching the spot, he found only a carpet of dead leaves and the gnarled architecture of roots. He circled, searching for disturbed earth, broken twigs. Nothing but uneven ground and a scattering of pine cones. A flush of foolishness warmed his face, yet the phantom shape lingered. A psychic residue suggesting it remained, just beyond the veil of sight. The subsequent days fell into a forced routine. Early rising, coffee, a brief perimeter walk, cleaning, installing new locks, minor repairs. Yet, with each passing day, the woods asserted their disquieting influence. Soft whispers seemed woven into the wind's fabric, sometimes coalescing into syllables that resembled his name, other times dissolving into meaningless susurrus. Flickers of movement teased the periphery of his vision among the trees, particularly as dusk thickened the air. Each time, investigation yielded nothing. His sleep deteriorated further. Lying rigid in the darkness, eyes squeezed shut, he felt his pulse hammering in his ears, a frantic metronome counting off every creak of the cabin's old bones, every sigh of the breeze beneath the door. His thoughts circled relentlessly around the conviction that something resided in the woods, something attentive, watchful. He fought it with logic, labeling it imagination, yet couldn't dismiss the tremor in his hands, the persistent knot of anxiety in his gut. One afternoon, steeling himself, he pushed deeper into the forest, determined to confront the source of his unease. The air felt heavy, pressing close. His footsteps sounded intrusive on the forest floor. He found more trees bearing the same enigmatic carvings, spaced deliberately, forming a subtle ring around his clearing. Each set of glyphs looked ancient, worn featureless by seasons. He paused, running his fingers over the incisions on one trunk. They felt unnaturally cold, smooth despite the rough bark, a visceral clenching in his core, a pressure building in his chest. He pressed onward, noting each marked tree. Soon he entered a clearing he hadn't seen before, dominated by a large moss-cloaked boulder. His legs felt unsteady as he approached. Faint scratches marred the boulder's crown, echoing the patterns on the trees. Crouching, heart hammering against his ribs, he felt the wind die around him, the forest holding its breath. He reached out, fingertips brushing the marks, sensing a faint tingle. A sudden sharp rustle nearby spun him around. Adrenaline surged, fists clenched, braced for confrontation. Only swaying branches met his gaze. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Enough. He turned and hurried back toward the sanctuary of the cabin. That night, sleep was an impossibility. He paced the living room, attuned to every nocturnal murmur. Around midnight, he extinguished the lamp and peered through the window. Clouds scudded across the sky, muting the moonlight. The forest silhouette seemed inkier, more substantial than usual. He felt an unshakable certainty that something stood among those trees, observing. The fine hairs on his arms lifted. His stomach coiled tight, his heart thudded so violently. He could feel the pulse in his throat. The impulse to flee was overwhelming. His keys, lying on the coffee table, felt heavy in his hand. But the fear of running from phantoms, from figments of his own strained psyche, held him fast. He forced himself to stay, sinking onto the couch. Keys clutched tight, resolving to face whatever this was. What that meant, he couldn't fathom, but it felt like the only remaining option. Questions swirled. The carving's origin, the fleeting shapes, the whispers. No answers presented themselves. He remained awake until the grey light of dawn seeped through the windows, his eyes burning. The strange occurrences persisted. Days later, while splitting logs, a distinct voice murmured directly behind him. Quiet, intimate, impossibly close. He whirled, axe still raised, muscles coiled, expecting to find someone feet away. Emptiness. Only the ceaseless sigh of the wind. His palms were slick. The axe handle felt slippery. He let it thud to the ground, leaning heavily against the woodpile, breath tearing at his lungs, arms trembling. That evening, attempting to call a friend, seek in local law about the carvings or the property's history, proved futile. The phone line crackled, connections dropping repeatedly, as if the very air conspired to maintain his isolation. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the useless receiver, his leg jiggling with nervous energy, defeated by static. A few days after that, another discovery. Circling the rear of the cabin, he noticed a narrow path, obscured by overgrown shrubs. The grass flattened into a distinct trail. Pushing aside thorny branches, he followed it for perhaps 30 feet and came upon a derelict shed, its structures sagging, planks warped, nails bleeding rust. The door hung askew on a single hinge. Stepping inside released a puff of stale, trapped air. Dim light filtered through gaps in the decaying walls, illuminating old tools, forgotten wooden crates, a cobweb-shrouded lantern. Moving deeper, kicking aside debris, the scent of damp earth and rot filled his nostrils. Then he saw it. Another carved board, broken but bearing the familiar pattern, identical to those on the trees. He picked it up, a chill seeping into his gut. It was about a foot long, the lines precise, deliberate. A muffled thud from above sent his heart leaping. A small chunk of wood, dislodged from a rafter, fell to the dirt floor, splitting cleanly in two. It too bore a fragment of the carving. His throat constricted. These symbols were pervasive, inescapable. He backed out of the shed quickly, stumbling over a loose plank near the threshold, his knee striking the frame sharply. Pain lanced up his leg. Limping back to the cabin, sweat stinging his eyes, his thoughts chaotic, replaying the discovery. He bolted the door behind him, leaning against it, gasping for breath. His knee throbbed. After applying ice from the small freezer, he collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the opposite wall, every external sound making him flinch. The following night descended into a new intensity of dread. Wind howled around the cabin's corners, rattling the window panes. The groaning of the surrounding trees morphed in his ears into low, guttural voices. He repeatedly rose to peer through the curtains, each time bracing for a face staring back, a jolt seizing his chest. He was slick with sweat despite the cool night air. His hands shook. A persistent buzzing filled his ears. Answers. He craved them, but had no direction to seek them. Finally, snatching a flashlight, he forced himself outside again, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He swept the beam across the darkness, playing it along the swaying tree line as he circled the cabin. The wind carried those indistinct murmurs, chillingly close. His own imagination populated the shadows with menacing shapes. He pushed onward. Returning to the front porch, he stopped listening. His pulse hammered at his temples. The whispers seemed louder now, clearer. His own breathing sounded loud, ragged in the stillness. The flashlight trembled in his grip. And then, for a fleeting second, framed between two towering pines, he saw it, a dark outline. Not exceptionally tall, perhaps his own height, but fundamentally wrong. Viscerally wrong. His stomach plummeted. He froze, transfixed. The silhouette remained utterly still. He tried to take a step forward, but his legs felt leaden, unresponsive. The wind shifted. A branch dipped, obscuring the view. When he swung the flashlight beam back, the space was empty. He stood rooted, every muscle screaming tension, breath sawing in his throat, mind racing. The palpable sense of being cornered by the encroaching darkness, by the woods themselves, was overwhelming. He retreated backward onto the porch, fumbled his way inside, slammed and locked the door. His chest felt constricted. Killing the lights, he stood in the center of the living room, swallowing hard against a rising nausea. A prickling sensation crawled from his scalp down his spine. Calm remained elusive for hours. Every time he closed his eyes, the silhouette burned behind his lids. His body screamed exhaustion, but his mind refused rest, remaining hyper-vigilant. In the days since, he sought refuge in labor, sealing cracks, reinforcing window frames, applying fresh paint to worn interior walls. Futile gestures against an intangible siege. But the nocturnal presence only intensifies. The whispers feel closer, more intimate. Soft footfalls sometimes echo on the porch boards. Or perhaps it's just the old house settling. Certainty remains elusive. Opening the door reveals only empty night. The constant tension knots his neck and shoulders. His back aches perpetually. Headaches bloom behind his eyes. The thought of packing, fleeing, is a constant lure. Yet, paradoxically, A strange compulsion anchors him here. This place, these woods, hold an ancient, unwritten history, and it seems to demand his attention. The carvings, the fleeting figures, the sibilant voices, fragments of a narrative insistent on being heard. But he possesses no lexicon to understand, no tools to engage, no proof beyond his own fraying nerves and the cryptic marks etched into wood and stone. Last night, he sat on the porch again, flashlight off, embracing the darkness, attempting pure observation. The forest loomed, an impenetrable wall of black. Clouds obscured the moon, visibility limited to mere yards. His body remained rigid, heartbeat a heavy thrum against his ribs. He strained his ears, waiting for movement, for sound beyond the wind's intermittent sighs. Those sighs carried the familiar whispers, fragments that sometimes brushed against his name, sometimes remained just formless exhalations that raised the hairs on his arms. His palms grew damp, his throat felt tight. He remained there until the first tentative fingers of dawn touched the eastern sky. Rising slowly, joints protesting, he went inside. He drained a bottle of water, leaning against the kitchen counter, vision blurred by sleeplessness, mind stretched thin as worn fabric. Still here, still confronting the same terrifying, watchful silence. One part of him craved the oblivion of collapse. Another remained coiled, perpetually braced for intrusion. Now, morning light fills the cabin again. He writes this, trying to impose order on chaos, his hand unsteady. The cabin feels suffocatingly small, yet the woods outside pulse with an inexplicable vitality. How much longer he can endure this limbo is uncertain. Stepping outside requires an act of will that drains him. Staying inside feels like being slowly smothered. Peace is a forgotten language here. The wind murmurs it nightly. The shadows confirm it daily. An old, patient presence resides here, and it demands an audience, willing or not. What comes next, he doesn't know. He only knows he's trapped, suspended between the terror of flight and the terror of remaining. And with every gust that stirs the pines, he hears the story whispering, the one he stumbled into, the one that shows no sign of letting him go. The sun bled orange across the serrated peaks as Elias reached the cabin. Weary from the serpentine ascent, the car engine's whine still echoing in his ears long after the climb shifted to footfall. It stood hunched in a meager clearing, dwarfed by skeletal pines clawing at the fading sky. The ground beneath a rumpled blanket of roots and stone. Weathered planks formed its skin, whispering tales of decay. The door, a slab of warped timber, groaned on protesting hinges as he shouldered it open. Inside, austerity reigned. A narrow cot, its mattress a mere suggestion, occupied one corner. A rough-hewn table and two rigid chairs held the center, stark beneath the vacant eye of a soot-blackened fireplace. Small grime-streaked windows blink through tattered curtains, relics of dust and time. His back slumped heavily near the threshold. The lantern found its perch on the table, casting a nascent amber glow. Solace was the objective. A quiet space for the unburdening of thought, perhaps the elusive ghost of inspiration. A simple notebook and graphite pencils were his tools. Expectations were modest, only stillness. He slid the bolt home, the metallic click unnervingly loud, and rattled the window frames. They held barely, protesting with a dry clatter. Unpacking was swift. Tins of food, water bottles glinting, matches, a torch with spare batteries, a folding knife nestled reassuringly in his palm. The air hung thick with the scent of old wood and damp earth, a primordial perfume. Outside, the silence was profound, broken only by the sighing exhalation of wind through the high branches. He consumed cold sustenance straight from the tin, the metallic tang sharp on his tongue. Seated at the table, pencil poised, he courted ideas. None came. His mind felt dense, unproductive. Darkness seeped in, absolute and swift. The lantern, now fully lit, became a fragile beacon near the window, pushing back against the encroaching void. Peering out, Elias found his view truncated. The trees stood too close, a palisade against the world. The darkness between them a solid, impenetrable thing. Branch tips scraped against unseen neighbors, a restless choreography directed by the breeze. Intermittently, a different sound pricked his awareness. A low susurration, a fleeting murmur almost beneath the threshold of hearing. He dismissed it, turning back to the blank page, but focus frayed. His gaze repeatedly drawn to the dark glass. Around midnight, a whisper curled distinctly through the night air, soft, brief, like a sigh given shape. Elias rose, drawn to the nearest window, pressing his ear against the cool, aged pane. Words remained elusive, if indeed there were any. Grabbing the torch, he extinguished the lantern's steady glow and eased the door open a fraction. The beam sliced through the clearing, illuminating bark textures, dew-kissed blades of grass. Wind stirred the branches, making shadows writhe and leap. Nothing moved that shouldn't. The whispering ceased. He secured the door, the bolt rasping home once more. Hours later, it returned. Closer now. A sound too consistent for the capricious wind, possessing a disquieting intentionality. His pulse hammered against his ribs. Torch clutched tight, he moved to the window facing the sound. Condensation filmed the antique glass. He felt the prickle of sweat beneath his shirt, wiped his brow, forced his breathing quiet. The torch beam lanced out. Twisted boughs, uneven ground. Then nestled between two towering pines, a figure, tall, unnervingly slender, with limbs that seemed too long. Its eyes caught the light, reflecting it back strangely. Clear, glassy, devoid of warmth. It stood utterly motionless. The face remained obscured, a mere suggestion of form beneath the shadowed brow. Yet the overall impression was humanoid, disturbingly askew. Elias's throat constricted. He held the light steady, saying nothing. After a tense eternity measured in heartbeats, it stepped deliberately backward, melting into the consuming darkness between the trees. Gone. The remainder of the night Elias spent huddled against the rough wall, torch in one hand, knife in the other. Sleep was unthinkable. He listened, straining for any recurrence, but only the wind and the cabin's settling groans answered. When dawn's grey infiltration finally softened the edges of the world, he rose stiffly and ventured out. Circling the cabin, torch still in hand, despite the growing light, he found them. Handprints, rendered in mud upon the window panes. Not smeared haphazardly, but arranged in patterns. Rows and circles coalescing into symbols that resonated with no known language or meaning. He touched one. The mud was dry, cracked, impossible. How could this have been done unheard while he was mere feet away? Someone, something, had been there. He scanned the clearing. No footprints marred the damp earth, no broken twigs betrayed passage. Only these unsettling sigils of earth upon the glass. Wiping proved futile. They clung stubbornly. Only a wet rag and vigorous scrubbing eventually removed them, leaving faint, ghostly stains. Throughout that day, Elias fought to maintain composure, feeding himself the thin gruel of rationalization. A local prank, elaborate and cruel. Ignore it. Focus. But the blank page remained hostile, his attention snagged constantly by the windows. The urge to flee warred with the long miles traveled, the investment made. He resolved to stay one more night. Perhaps he could confront this phantom, demand answers. Before dusk painted the sky again, he gathered heavy stones, placing them near the door like primitive wards. Windows were shut tight, locks tested, retested. The door bolt slid home with finality. Hunger was a distant knot. He forced down some water, pacing the cramped interior like a caged animal. As darkness reclaimed the clearing, the lantern was lit but kept low on the hearthstones, casting long, distorted shadows. A meager defense against the gloom. He took up his post near a window, torch off, waiting. The sound of his own measured breathing unnaturally loud in the stillness. Time stretched, viscous and slow. His back ached against the unyielding wall. Hours crept by. Then a faint scratching, fingernails on wood. It emanated from the cabin's rear wall. Elias rose, silent as smoke, and pressed his ear to the timber. The sound was steady, rhythmic, a dry, insistent rasp as if something methodically tested the grain. His teeth clenched. Retreating, he grabbed the torch. Opening a door into that darkness felt like madness. He opted for the window, craning his neck, but the angle was poor. After a moment's hesitation, resolve hardened. Knife and torch leading, he slipped outside. The night air bit, his breath pluming white. He moved with deliberate slowness, torch beams sweeping the cabin walls. Rounding the back, he saw them. Shallow, fresh, scratch marks scarring the planks. Thin flakes of damp wood marked where the surface had been abraded. He swung the torch towards the tree line. There it stood, perhaps 10 paces away, near the clearing's edge. Those eyes, polished stones reflecting the beam. He saw it more clearly now. Skin unnaturally pale, limbs like starved branches. It seemed unclothed, though the shadows clung, obscuring details. It didn't move. Elias raised the knife, his voice emerging raw, strained. "Who are you? What you want?" Silence answered. Then the figure turned fluidly and stepped behind the broad trunk of a pine. Elias surged forward, light stabbing at the space. Nothing. No rustle of retreat, no snap of twig. He swept the beam frantically. Only trees and deepening darkness. He backed away slowly, knife held high, retreated into the cabin, slammed the door, shot the bolt, and shoved the heavy table against it. The long hours that followed were a slow torment. The scratching returned, migrating from wall to wall. The faint whispering resurfaced, a sibilant breath just beyond the wood. He remained inside, a prisoner torch beam playing uselessly against the interior walls. Waiting. The scratching stopped, started, circled. Sometimes the whispers seemed to coalesce, almost forming words, almost laughing. A dry, airy sound like escaping gas. Goosebumps prickled his skin. He stood rigid, knife extended, listening to the faint vibrations in the planks. When the scratching grew insistent, the wood felt terrifyingly thin. Exhaustion began its insidious creep. Legs trembled, arms ached from the sustained tension of gripping the knife. He forced himself to lower it, flexed cramped fingers. He kept the torch off, conserving power, relying on hearing. His ears strained, picking up every nuance. The skitter of unseen things, the sigh of wind, the occasional snap of a distant twig. Once, a low grunt followed by slow, deliberate footfalls moving away from the cabin. He held his breath, praying it was over. Near dawn, the noises ceased entirely. He waited another hour, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence, before daring to dismantle the barricade. Grey light filtered in. The clearing was empty, deceptively peaceful. He checked the walls. More scratches, deeper this time. One plank showed a thin crack. He touched the raw wood, relieved it had held. He hadn't checked the boarded windows from inside, but stepping out, he saw them. New muddy handprints arranged in yet another complex, sprawling pattern across the glass panes revealed between the planks. The mud was wet, pungent. A wave of nausea washed over him. Enough. He couldn't endure another night. Packing was a blur of frantic movement. Torch, knife, remaining rations. As soon as the light was strong enough to discern the trail, he fled. He moved quickly, casting frequent, fearful glances over his shoulder. The figure remained unseen. The forest seemed unnervingly normal, birdsong threading through the quiet sigh of the wind. His heart hammered relentlessly. He navigated by landmarks etched into his panicked memory. The sentinel rock, the fallen giant, the sea of ferns. Reaching the car felt like surfacing from a drowning depth. The engine catching, roaring to life, was the sound of improbable escape. He didn't ease his grip on the wheel, didn't truly breathe, until miles of paved road lay between him and that place. Solace remained elusive, inspiration stillborn. He had found something else in those woods, something ancient and unknowable. He didn't understand what it was. He had no desire to. Explanations felt dangerous, irrelevant. He wouldn't speak of the cabin. He only craved forgetfulness. Erasure of the whispers, the glassy eyes, the muddy sigils on the panes. He longed for sleep uninterrupted by the sound of spectral nails on wood, for a silence that wasn't merely emptiness, but genuine peace. A peace he feared he might never find again. A profound weariness, born of relentless deadlines and the city's ceaseless thrum, had settled deep within Ilara. Escape wasn't just desired, it was a primal need. Away from the faces, the noise, the crushing weight of expectation. She found her sanctuary, or so she hoped, in a rented cabin swallowed by deep woods. A place deliberately chosen for its utter lack of connection. No neighbors, no tendrils of cell signal. Only the mute company of ancient trees. Weeks of scrimping had purchased this fragile promise of solitude. A handful of days to simply exist, to draw an untroubled breath. The journey itself felt like a shedding of skins. Pavement yielded to gravel, then to a serpentine dirt track that burrowed ever deeper into the forest's embrace. The world outside the car windows grew dense, primeval. The sight of another vehicle became a forgotten memory. It was less a drive, more a descent into somewhere else entirely. Finally, the cabin materialized, a compact structure of wood and shadow, offering the bare necessities: a bed, a rudimentary kitchen, a small washroom. Its porch surveyed an ocean of trees, stretching towards an unseen horizon. Perfection, Elara thought, lay in this profound isolation. That first day unfolded like a dream remembered. Her phone remained dormant in her bag, a silenced oracle. She wandered meandering paths, the forest floor soft beneath her boots. The quiet so absolute it felt like a presence. Thoughts, long tangled and choked by urban static, began to unravel, finding space to breathe in the stillness. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, she coaxed a small fire to life, its flickering light a companion against the encroaching dark. Dinner was simple, eaten on the porch, serenaded by the wind sighing through the high branches. Later, cocooned inside, the lock secured, she surrendered to a sleep deeper and more restorative than any she'd known in months. Morning arrived crisp and bright, but peace shattered the moment she opened the door. There, stark against the weathered porch floorboards, lay a folded square of plain paper. An errant breeze? A piece of forgotten litter? She stooped, curiosity warring with the nascent unease. Unfolding it, the words scrawled within struck like ice water. "I saw you sitting by the fire." Elara froze, the note trembling slightly in her grip. Her mind scrabbled for logic. A prankster? But who? The isolation was absolute. She hadn't glimpsed another human soul. Her gaze swept the clearing, probing the shadowed tree line, finding only the impassive woods, hearing only the wind's indifferent whisper. Retreating inside, the click of the lock echoing unnaturally loud, she fought to regain composure. A misplaced joke, perhaps? A phantom neighbor from some unseen hollow? The explanations felt thin, brittle. She tucked the note away, deep within a drawer, brewed coffee with hands that weren't entirely steady, and tried to resurrect the previous day's tranquility. But the spell was broken. Every glance through the window was now laden with suspicion. Every rustle of leaves outside, every creak of the cabin's timbers, a potential signal. The feeling of solitude had curdled into something else. Exposure. Yet the woods remained stubbornly empty, offering no confirmation of her rising fear. Nightfall brought a heightened vigilance. Locks were not just turned, but tested, retested. In the suffocating darkness of the small bedroom, she lay rigid, senses straining against the silence, listening for the footfall that never came. "It's nothing," she told herself. The mantra paper-thin against the memory of the note. The chilling intimacy of being observed, unseen, by the fire. Someone had been close. Close enough. The next dawn, hesitation warred with necessity. She couldn't remain imprisoned by fear. Steeling herself, Elara opened the door and saw it immediately. Another note, this one deliberately propped against the porch railing, an offering left on the threshold. A tremor ran through her fingers as she reached for it. "I watched you check the locks last night." The air grew thin, cold. This wasn't random. This was focused. They knew her actions, her anxieties. They had been there, cloaked by the night, while she sought safety within these thin walls. Again, her eyes scanned the perimeter, a desperate, futile search for the watcher in the trees. Nothing. Only the vast, silent wilderness and the suffocating certainty of being prey. Panic began to claw its way up her throat. Leave? Call for help? The phone remained useless, a dead weight. The car. Would it even navigate that treacherous track in haste? She paced the small confines of the cabin, caught between the instinct to flee and the paralysis of fear. A joke, she whispered, the words lacking conviction. Just a twisted prank. But the dread was a physical thing now, a cold knot tightening in her chest. The remainder of the day dissolved into a tense vigil by the windows, her gaze fixed on the unmoving trees, waiting for a sign, a movement, anything. The forest offered only silence, punctuated by the occasional, nerve-jangling snap of a twig. Darkness fell not as a comfort, but as a shroud. Sleep was an impossibility. She sat bolt upright in bed. The single lamp casted long, dancing shadows. Every sound amplified, every silence pregnant with threat. Exhaustion must have claimed her eventually, sometime in the grey, liminal hours before sunrise. Because she awoke with a start, not to silence, but to a soft thump from just outside, like something dropped. Heart hammering against her ribs, she crept to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. On the porch, directly before the door, lay a third note. She didn't want to touch it, didn't want to absorb its poison, but the compulsion was absolute. Her hand shook violently as she unlatched the door, snatched the paper, and retreated. Unfolding it revealed a message that felt like a violation. "You didn't sleep well, did you?" Her thoughts fractured. Closer, bolder. They had been assured there, on the porch, perhaps peering through the glass while she succumbed to fitful sleep. The clearing, scanned yet again, remained maddeningly empty. Enough. The cost of the rental, the lost piece, none of it mattered anymore. Only escape. She moved with frantic energy, throwing belongings into her bag haphazardly. Clothes, toiletries, the remnants of her shattered retreat. Survival instinct screamed louder than reason. Reaching under the bed for her hiking boots, her fingers brushed against something alien. Paper, crumpled, nestled in the dust and shadows. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. With trembling hands, she smoothed it open. "You look tired." Nausea surged. The room seemed to tilt. Inside. They had been inside the cabin, while she slept, vulnerable and oblivious, close enough to leave this hidden message, this intimate observation. Breathing became a conscious, difficult effort. Packing ceased to matter. Keys were snatched from the hook. The cabin door barely secured behind her as she bolted towards the car. The ignition key scraped, fumbled, her terror peaking at the thought of engine failure. Then blessed relief. It roared to life, a jarring mechanical cry in the stillness. Tires spun on the dirt track as she reversed, fleeing the clearing without a backward glance. The drive back was a blur of speed and adrenaline. The winding road, a dangerous ribbon, unwound too fast. Her eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, expecting a figure to emerge from the trees. a silent sentinel watching her departure. But there was only the receding forest, the empty track. She didn't slow, didn't pause, until the comforting solidity of the main highway stretched before her. Miles melted away before the tension in her shoulders began to ease, before her white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel relaxed. Months have passed. The cabin exists now only as a dark memory, a place revisited in unwelcome dreams. Ilara never learned who left the notes or their ultimate purpose. She tells herself it was a cruel, elaborate hoax, yet the sensation lingers. The feeling of unseen eyes, the chilling intimacy of those handwritten words. It feels unfinished, as if some vital part of her remained snared in those woods, tethered to the watcher. Sometimes in the dead quiet of the night, the silence feels different, attentive, and the final note, the one found beneath the bed, echoes in her mind. You look tired. A message left by someone who had been closer than breathing, someone who might still be out there, waiting. The woods possess a nocturnal language, a dialect of shadow and rustle Silas once believed he spoke fluently. He'd courted solitude in wild places since boyhood, finding solace in the untamed choir. But that particular night, swallowed by a path trod only once before, the cadence shifted. It wasn't merely the familiar discourse of fauna. An unsettling resonance suggested something else lingered in the deep timber. An awareness listening intently as he listened. He diverged from the well-worn artery of the main trail that afternoon, lured by a capillary path discovered in some forgotten hiking almanac. It promised a vista of sublime isolation, leagues distant from the commonplace campsites. That was the allure. A profound stillness, a sanctuary where the world dissolved into windsong and the rhythm of his own breathing, unburdened by the presence of others. A secret pilgrimage whispered only to the map, conceived in impulse. What harm could nestle in such anonymity? The track proved meager, a choked gullet between thickets of ancient trees. Sunlight dripped sparingly through the dense lacework of leaves overhead, lending the afternoon the premature gloom of twilight. With each step deeper, the world muted, the usual forest symphony dwindling to punctuated bird cries and the furtive scurryings in the undergrowth. Mostly there was only the steady cadence of his boots on the loam, the crisp percussion of decaying leaves. An hour dissolved, and thus before a modest clearing presented itself, a suitable pause. Darkness gathered swiftly in these depths. The imperative was to raise his shelter before night fully claimed the woods. As ochre and violet bled across the sliver of visible sky, Silas coaxed a small fire to life, its flames a flickering defiance against the encroaching dark. He unpacked his rations, settling near the warmth. For a time, tranquility reigned. The sighing breeze orchestrated the pines. The fire popped and hissed its comfort in litany. A distant owl offered its tremulous call. Yet, as true night descended, enfolding the clearing in absolute black, a dissonance crept in. Subtle initially, a prickling awareness at the nape of his neck. The phantom sensation of a gaze fixed upon him. He dismissed it. Solitude's mirage, the mind conjuring specters in the vacuum. But the feeling persisted, tenacious, Each glance towards the impenetrable wall of trees felt met, observed. He forced his focus onto the fire's dance, the known sounds, yet the disquiet coiled tighter within him. Eventually, succumbing to the unease, he resolved to seek refuge within the thin membrane of his tent. Safety, however illusory, beckoned. He meticulously doused the embers, the hiss of water loud in the sudden stillness, then zipped the nylon door shut, burrowing into his sleeping bag. The moment his eyes closed, it began. A delicate rhythmic tapping emanating from the blackness just beyond the canvas. He sat bolt upright, pulse hammering against his ribs, straining to pass the sound. It was soft, almost subliminal, like knuckles rapping gently on distant wood. Holding his breath, he listened. Tap, 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 unwavering, originating from the clearing's edge. It lacked the chaotic signature of wildlife, the randomness of nature. This was measured, deliberate. His hand closed around the cold metal of his flashlight. He tore the zipper open, slicing the night with a cone of harsh white light. The beam interrogated the trees, illuminating only a static tableau of bark, branch, and leaf. Silence slammed back. The tapping ceased instantly. He waited, heart a frantic drum, ears straining against the sudden absence of sound, hearing only the faint sibilance of wind through foliage. A branch, he reasoned, an acorn falling, a woodpecker. He retreated into the tent, sealing the entrance, forcing slow breaths. Yet, no sooner had he settled again, eyes shut tight, than the rhythm resumed. Closer now, louder. Tap, tap, tap. A cold dread washed over him. He sat frozen, mind skittering, picturing unseen hands. He fought the urge to remain hidden, paralyzed. The not knowing was its own torment. Again, the flashlight. Again, the ripping sound of the zipper. He scrambled out, sweeping the beam in frantic arcs, and again, instantaneous silence descended, profound and watchful. The woods held their breath with him. His own breathing was ragged, shallow. His trembling hands struggled to keep the light steady. Nothing. Only trees standing like mute sentinels in the vast, swallowing dark. He backed into the tent, a fugitive retreating to his cell, securing the zipper as if it were a vault door. Calm down. Breathe. It's nothing. The mantra felt hollow against the certainty humming in his nerves. He was not alone. He lay rigid, hyper-alert, every minute sound amplified in the charged silence. The frantic thudding in his own chest, the whisper of nylon as he shifted, the sigh of leaves outside, but the tapping did not return. Hours crawled by, measured in heartbeats, his body locked in tense anticipation. Then, just as exhaustion began to fray the edges of his vigilance, a new sound surfaced. A dry, rasping caress against the taut nylon directly outside. His breath hitched. Ice traced his spine. The scratching was agonizingly slow, methodical, like fingernails deliberately drawn across the fabric. He lay utterly still, unable to move, scarcely breathing, every nerve ending alight. The sound crept along the side of the tent, a meticulous exploration, mapping the contours of his fragile sanctuary. His thoughts scattered like startled birds. No animal moved with such patient intent. This was other, purposeful. His fingers spasmed around the flashlight, knuckles white. A scream built in his throat, trapped behind a barricade of terror. The scratching paused. Silence returned, heavier this time, pressing down, suffocating. And then a whisper, so faint it might have been imagined, yet terribly clear, seeming to coil directly into his ear. "Silas, come out." His blood turned to slush, the voice, a sibilant breath coalescing into words, ancient and unnervingly close. "Come out." He held himself rigid, breath trapped in his lungs, instinct screaming, "Stay hidden, be silent." But the whisper persisted, soft, insidious, a siren's call from the abyss. He offered no reply, no movement, just stared, wide-eyed, at the zipper's faint outline, the fragile boundary between him and the unknown. He could feel the frantic pulse in his temples, hear the rasp of his own shallow breaths. Then, as abruptly as it began, the voice vanished. Silence reclaimed the woods, broken only by the frantic pounding within his own chest. He waited coiled tight, listening for the slightest stir, the faintest indication that the presence lingered. There was nothing but the profound, empty quiet stretching into the infinite night. Sleep was an impossibility. He remained sitting, flashlight clutched like a talisman, eyes fixed on the tent door, waiting out the darkness, every muscle screaming with tension. His resolve formed. First light meant escape. Back swiftly, flee this haunted patch of earth, never return. Eternity condensed into those final hours before dawn, bled greyly through the canopy, a reprieve that felt fragile, temporary. He stumbled out, limbs stiff, mind hazed with sleepless dread. Packing was a frantic, clumsy affair, hands shaking, eyes constantly darting towards the silent tree line, expecting spectral eyes to be watching. No food, no rest. Gear crammed haphazardly into his pack, he plunged back onto the narrow trail, legs unsteady beneath him, heart still hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He cast fearful glances over his shoulder, listening for pursuit. But the forest remained utterly still, impassive, as if observing his departure with a silent, ancient indifference. Reaching his car felt like surfacing from a drowning depth. He hurled the pack into the trunk, slammed the door, ignition catching with a reassuring roar. His hands clenched the steering wheel, white-knuckled. No backward glance towards the trailhead, no final look into the shadowed maw of the woods. He drove, eyes locked on the unfolded ribbon of road. The engine's thrum a thin shield against the memory, the whisper clinging like cobwebs in the corners of his mind. "Silas, come out." What entity shared the woods with him that night remained a chilling enigma. But one truth settled deep in his bones, immutable as stone. The wilderness held secrets he no longer wished to uncover alone. The memory of that afternoon is tactile. The air itself felt different, thick with an invisible tension, clinging to my skin like damp wool. Elias, that was me then, piloting a company car down the forgotten stretch of highway towards some client meeting in a town barely sketched onto the periphery of things. A duty I embraced with profound indifference. This ribbon of fractured asphalt, stitched with faded ochre lines, unspooled through desolate landscapes, mostly empty. Windows cracked. I invited a sliver of cool air into the cabin's quietude. Nothing in the mundane departure that morning hinted at the strangeness poised to rupture the routine. It began subtly near a bend where the wind intensified with unnatural focus. Brittle leaves scraped across the tarmac, their sound a dry whisper invading the cabin. Then ahead, dust began to dance, coalescing not into a drift but a focused gyre spinning fiercely on a single point. An impossible column of agitated air and debris. A tightening knot formed in my chest. This wasn't mere wind, it was structure. An ethereal fence partitioning the mundane road. My foot eased off the accelerator reflexively. Both hands clenched the steering wheel, breath held captive in my lungs. Unlike ordinary gusts, this vortex held its ground, stubbornly occupying my lane. A glance at the dashboard clock confirmed my tardiness. A small anxiety warring with a larger instinctual urge to halt. Yet, the meeting beckoned. With hesitant pressure on the gas, I nudged the car forward, hoping the atmospheric anomaly would simply unravel. The instant the car's prow breached the dusty perimeter, a tremor ran through the vehicle's bones. Not a violent shock, but a deep somatic vibration, originating somewhere in the chassis or engine. Simultaneously, the radio erupted in static. A pop song vanished, replaced by a crackling deluge, a chaos of overlapping, distorted susurrations and high-frequency hums. Meaningless syllables stumbled over each other, yet possessed a disturbing rhythm, like a congregation whispering in frantic unison. My skin crawled. A sudden dryness seized my throat. Beads of sweat prickled my forehead. The car shuddered again, a subtle quiver transmitting through the wheel into my arms. My heart hammered against my ribs. My foot found the brake, pressing harder. The swirling column spat grit against the windshield. Light, insistent taps. Then, as abruptly as I'd entered, I was through it. Calm air settled once more, but the radio persisted, spewing its unnerving static. Unable to bear the sound, I stabbed the power button, silencing it. Drawing ragged breaths, I checked the rearview mirror. The dust devil remained, a relentless pirouette on the asphalt behind me. My thoughts scrambled for explanations. A freak microburst, an unusual thermal current. Neither accounted for the spectral choir that had bled through the speakers. That sound had struck a deeper chord of fear, feeling disturbingly personal, as if I'd been specifically targeted. At the next viable shoulder, a patch of gravel beside the decaying road, I signaled and pulled over, my hands betraying me with a persistent tremor. Hazard lights pulsed rhythmically. I sat for a long moment, forcing air into tight lungs, trying to dispel the lingering sensation at the nape of my neck. Phantom whispers, echoing even in the radio's absence. Pushing the driver's door open, I stepped out onto unsteady legs, my chest constricted. The sun, descending behind a stand of skeletal trees, cast elongated shadows that striped the road. My gaze snapped back to the vortex. It hadn't dissipated, hadn't moved. It continued its furious rotation, turning leaves and earth into a miniature tornado locked in place. A faint echo, like static inside my own skull, made my ears ring. I mechanically popped the hood, scanning the engine for any sign of distress caused by the vibrations. All appeared normal, offering no solace. The frantic drumming of my own pulse felt loud enough to rupture my eardrums. A genuine breeze stirred then, rustling the roadside foliage and kicking up fine dust around my shoes. I slammed the hood shut, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. A flicker of movement registered at the edge of my vision. Slowly, deliberately, I turned. Standing immersed within the swirling dust was a figure. Tall, unnervingly slender, its form barely discernible through the particulate screen. My scalp tightened, my stomach plummeted. It possessed the general shape of a person draped in dark fabric, yet its features remained frustratingly indistinct. The vortex danced around it, a chaotic shroud, while the figure itself remained utterly still, facing me. No face was visible, but the sensation of being watched, of being seen, prickled across my skin, raising every hair in a primal salute to the uncanny. A quick scan confirmed my isolation. The road stretched empty in both directions, flanked only by trees. My mouth was arid. Swallowing felt like a monumental effort. My hands shook, my feet seemingly rooted to the gravel. The whoosh of the spinning wind intensified around the figure. Then, with startling swiftness, it turned and glided toward the trees. It didn't walk, not truly. It seemed rather to be absorbed by the encroaching shadows. The vortex persisted for another heartbeat, then collapsed abruptly, its captive elements raining softly down onto the asphalt. A cough escaped me, provoked by the settling dust. I took a few hesitant steps forward, peering into the tree line where the figure had vanished. The distant snap of a twig reached me, but the woods revealed nothing. My heart pounded violently. I clenched my fists, torn between the desperate urge to flee and a morbid curiosity pulling me towards the spot of its disappearance. Forcing myself back to the car, I circled it, inspecting the passenger side. Tires intact, paint unscratched. The ephemeral barrier had left no physical mark, yet the feeling of being observed from the woods intensified. A palpable pressure building in my chest, fraying my breath. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised colors. The realization struck that lingering here risked being caught on this desolate road after nightfall. That thought alone churned my stomach. Superstition had never been my companion, but the phantom voices and the dust-shrouded entity had thoroughly unnerved me. This place felt intrinsically unsafe. My body remained coiled, muscles taut, ears straining against the quiet. Back inside, I locked the doors immediately. The key turned, the engine catching with a reassuring, familiar hum. Relief washed over me, fleetingly. Then the radio clicked on, entirely of its own accord. The volume was low, almost subliminal, but the static was back, threaded with those distorted whispers. My hand trembled on the gear stick. I jabbed the power button again, silencing it, then tapped the console nervously. Yet, a faint crackle seemed to leak from the speakers themselves, as if originating deeper within the dashboard circuitry. A brief hiss, then a sound like a garbled human word, instantly dissolving back into static. Sweat traced a path down my temple. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide, haunted eyes and shallow breathing. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. Expected perhaps, on this antiquated highway, but it amplified my unease. Shoving the phone back into my pocket, I gritted my teeth and mashed the radio's power button repeatedly. The static eventually faded into a strained silence. Though whether it was truly gone or merely dormant, I couldn't be sure. Shifting into drive, I pulled onto the asphalt, consciously keeping my gaze fixed forward, resisting the urge to consult the mirror. My pulse throbbed at my temples. My foot felt leaden on the accelerator. A sideways glance at the gravel shoulder revealed only empty space and a scattering of leaves. The vortex was gone. The road ahead looked deceptively peaceful. Miles dissolved beneath the tires, each one measured by the frantic beat in my chest. I switched on the air conditioning, hoping to purge the stale, anxious air inside the car. My throat felt raw, my skin clammy. Calm remained elusive, but I focused on keeping my grip steady. Intermittently, a faint pop or crackle would emanate from the speakers, causing me to flinch, but the full-blown static held back. A green sign promised the next town lay 10 miles ahead. My resolve solidified. I would stop at the first sign of civilization, be it gas station or rest area. I needed to ground myself, splash cold water on my face, attempt to rationalize the irrational, but the image persisted. That figure, materializing from dust, its unseen gaze pinning me. The certainty of its presence resonated deep in my bones. Finally, an old gas station emerged on the right, its sign flickering erratically, the entire place exuding an air of weary neglect. It was refuge nonetheless. I parked beside a corroded pump under the glare of a single, buzzing overhead lamp that illuminated the cracked concrete. Turning off the ignition, I listened intently. Silence. A slow exhale escaped my lips. Stepping out, the smell of petrol and old oil filled the air. A small grimy store was attached, its window plastered with faded flyers, the door handle broken. Inside, beneath fluorescent lights, a bored-looking attendant presided over a cramped counter. I offered a curt nod, bypassing conversation, and retrieved a bottle of water from a humming cooler. As I paid, he inquired idly if I was southbound. Affirming this, I ventured, "See anything unusual out on the highway today?" He merely shrugged, his expression suggesting I was the unusual element. "Nah, not really," he mumbled. "Wind kicks up dust sometimes. Folks round here say it's haunted ground, but I ain't seen nothing." He returned his attention to a worn magazine. I didn't press further. Unscrewing the cap, I drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing my parched throat. Outside again, leaning against the car, I watched the sky deepen to a bruised orange as the temperature began to fall. The encounter replayed relentlessly in my mind. The vortex, the figure, the feeling of being singled out. My knees felt curiously weak, as if I'd run miles. Pressing a palm to my forehead, I felt the residual heat of fear. Lingering held no appeal. It was time to reach the town before full darkness descended. The final stretch of highway passed without incident. Though fraught with tension, the radio remained blessedly mute. The asphalt varied, smooth stretches alternating with jarring cracks that made the tires thump. each impact causing a small jolt of adrenaline. My mirror checks became compulsive, scanning the empty road behind me. At long last, the scattered lights of the small town pierced the gloom. Relief, potent and welcome, washed over me as I drove beneath functioning street lamps, past houses radiating warmth. I pulled into the motel parking lot, killed the engine, and felt the ache in my shoulders from gripping the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Retrieving my suitcase, I slammed the car door, locking it swiftly. My eyes darted around the lot, half expecting a swirl of dust to rise from the shadows, or a thin figure to detach itself from the darkness between buildings. Inside the anonymous room, I dropped my bag on the bed, the thin walls barely muffling the sound of a television next door. A fine tremor still agitated my hands. Leaning against the cheap desk by the window, I took several slow, deliberate breaths, attempting to convince myself the ordeal was concluded. But the figure's image was indelible, the memory of the static voices visceral. Relief felt hollow, overshadowed by a persistent sense that something unseen had followed me, its presence lingering just beyond perception. My skin prickled whenever I recalled its silent scrutiny. Throughout the evening, I found myself repeatedly drawn to the window, scanning the darkness outside, haunted by the feeling that an aperture had been opened on that lonely highway, and I possessed no knowledge of how to close it. Sleep, when it eventually came, was shallow and troubled, punctuated by echoes of wind and whispers. The wrongness began the instant the key turned. An insidious draft, cold despite the still evening air, pushed against Elias's chest as the barn door groaned open. The atmosphere inside felt viscid, heavy. His lungs constricted. A prickling sensation traced pathways across his skin. He smelled the cloying sweetness of burnt wax mingled with something acrid. A bitterness that scraped the back of his throat. Flicking on his torch, Elias stepped across the threshold, the beam cutting a swathe through the gloom. It illuminated cramped confines, walls weeping moisture under the stark light. His boots sank slightly, leaving clear impressions on the packed earth floor, and then, tucked in the far corner, partially obscured by decaying lumber and a skeletal rusted wheelbarrow, he saw it. The altar. A knot tightened low in his gut. Candles burned upon its surface, the flame steady and unwavering, mocking the locked door he'd just opened. Weeks prior, this parcel of neglected land had seemed a sanctuary. Elias, seeking quietude and distance, had purchased it cheaply. The house, though weathered, possessed sound bones. Miss Albright, the brisk estate agent, had gestured towards the weathered structure out back. Useful for storage, perhaps a future workshop. Nothing prepared him for this clandestine discovery. During the formal inspection, his attention had lingered only briefly inside the barn. Straw carpeted the floor. The overhead beams appeared robust. No leaks, no obvious structural failings, and certainly no altar. Had it been concealed behind the accumulated detritus? Or had his gaze simply slid past it, unwilling to register? Now, on this first proper night of exploration, he stood mesmerized by the hypnotic dance of the flames. The tapers formed a crude circle. Nestled at its center rested a small, roughly hewn wooden bowl, brimming with some sort of opaque, dark liquid that radiated a sour, unpleasant odor. Dried herbs lay scattered like forgotten runes. Elias inhaled sharply. The pungent scent, combined with a pervasive dampness, created a miasma of profound unease. He could discern the faint, persistent crackle of the wicks, the flame tip swaying in a synchronized, unnatural rhythm. He edged closer, compelled to investigate the makeshift table. It appeared hastily constructed, a rough plank affixed to two squat logs, forming a primitive stand. Wax drippings stained its surface, pooling in solidified lumps around the base of each candle. Elias tentatively touched the wood. It felt strangely warm, as if perpetually bathed in low heat. He couldn't fathom how the candles sustained their burn without diminishing. Some looked nearly pristine, others significantly consumed. Reaching towards a half-burnt taper, a bead of molten wax spat onto the back of his hand. It stung fiercely. He hissed, jerking back, wiping the sticky residue onto his denim-clad leg. A primal urge to quell the flames arose. Moistening his fingers, Elias pinched the first wick, wincing as residual heat bled through. One by one, he extinguished the others, plunging the barn into near total darkness, save for the wandering beam of his torch. The moment the last flame died, an abrupt chill settled over his skin. The cloying smell of smoke and bitter herbs clung stubbornly to his clothes. Grasping the door handle, he stepped back into the night air, the heavy lock clicking shut behind him. He stood motionless in the yard, the cool evening breeze a welcome contrast against his face. His heart pounded in a heavy cadence against his ribs. Rationalizations warred with instinct. Squatters, vestiges of the previous owner's eccentricities. He scanned the perimeter, seeking signs of intrusion. Footprints near the door, compromised windows. Nothing. The lock was solid, yielding only to his key. Sleep offered no refuge that night. His mind replayed the unsettling tableau. Flickering candles painting shifting shadows on damp wood, the murky bowl, the cryptic scattering of herbs. Each time his eyes drifted shut, the images returned, vivid and disturbing. He startled awake several times, convinced he heard furtive rustling in the hallway. But the house remained stubbornly empty and silent. Dawn brought brittle courage. Elias crossed the dew-kissed grass towards the barn, the rising sun glinting off myriad tiny water droplets. His boots crushed the wet blades, leaving dark tracks. He noted his own footprints from the night before, solitary trails leading to and from the barn door. No others marred the damp earth. Taking out his key, he braced himself and unlocked the heavy door. The smell, potent and immediate, assaulted him again. Inside, the candles blazed anew, every single one. Fresh wax weeping down their sides. The air hung thick and humid, like a sealed, stagnant sauna. His pulse quickened. His throat felt suddenly parched. He meticulously examined the door, the frame, the small grime-coated windows set high in the walls. No signs of forced entry, no splintered wood, no shattered panes. No footprints disturbed the packed earth floor inside. He swept his gaze across the walls. They glistened, beaded with moisture. Tiny rivulets trickled down the aged planks, faint, ethereal wisps of vapor curled near the ceiling beams. Retrieving the torch from his back pocket, he cast its beam into the corners. They were saturated. Nails and hinges showed a fine patina of fresh rust. Cobwebs laced the rafters, yet conspicuously, not a single spider was visible. His legs felt unsteady as he took a hesitant step towards the altar. The candles seemed to hiss, their flames flickering erratically, as if sensing his approach. Goose flesh prickled his arms. His own heartbeat thudded loudly in his ears. With forced resolve, he reached down, pinching out the defiant flames one by one. The instant he extinguished the last, a more potent wave of the bitter, herbal perfume surged forth, stinging his eyes and provoking a ragged cough. The barn immediately felt colder, his breath pluming visibly in the air. Elias retreated, locking the door with a sense of growing futility. This demanded explanation. Back in the house, he sifted through the previous occupants' detritus, left in dusty boxes, old receipts, faded letters, torn flyers for long-past local fairs. Nothing offered a clue about the barn's secrets. He tried reaching Ms. Albright again, leaving a message inquiring about the barn's history, his voice tighter than intended. Then, resolving to dismantle the source of the disturbance, he drove into town for supplies. Thick work gloves, heavy-duty refuse sacks, perhaps some stronger cleaning agents, and extra locks, though their efficacy now seemed dubious. At the hardware store, he casually asked the clerk, a lanky man named Silas, about unusual finds in old barns. Silas merely shrugged, mentioning odd hobbies and accumulated junk. He recommended a potent mildew remover and suggested a dehumidifier for the dampness. Elias thanked him, purchased his items, and headed back, the mundane advice feeling utterly inadequate. Returning under a bruised late afternoon sky, threatening rain, he dropped the supplies inside the house and walked directly to the barn. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the key. The moment the door swung inward, the sight confirmed his deepest dread. The candles were lit again, arranged precisely as before, as if his earlier interventions had been mere dreams. His jaw tightened, nausea churned in his stomach. The acrid blend of wax and herbs stung his eyes. The floor felt stickier now, the walls glistening with an almost obscene amount of moisture. He hung the battery-powered lantern he'd brought on a hook near the entrance, refusing to work in the oppressive dimness. He needed to see. He turned to face the altar. The flames burned with unnerving steadiness. He studied the wooden bowl. The dark liquid within seemed replenished, flecks of herbs swirling gently on its surface. Condensation beaded its rim. The odor was sharper, more penetrating than before. Water, oil, something else entirely. Speculation offered no solace. Pulling on the thick gloves, Elias began the grim task. He seized the persistent candles one by one, dropping them into a metal pail. He emptied a bottle of water over them, ensuring they couldn't miraculously reignite. Lifting the wooden bowl proved it heavier than it looked. The liquid sloshed, splattering dark droplets onto the dirt floor. He carried it carefully outside, dumping the contents behind the barn where the weeds grew thickest. The foul scent clung to his nostrils. He rinsed the bowl thoroughly with bottled water, then set it aside near a pile of wood scraps. Back inside, the lantern cast long dancing shadows. Sweat beaded on Elias's forehead despite the lingering chill. His eyes darted nervously towards the corners, the rafters, anticipating something. His throat felt constricted. His heart hammered against his ribs. He began pulling down stray bits of desiccated fabric, clumps of dried leaves that seemed suspiciously placed near the altar site. He cleared the makeshift table completely, stuffing everything: herbs, candle stubs, hardened wax lumps, into a large black trash bag. He wanted no trace left, nothing to invite this phenomenon back. As he worked, a sudden inexplicable rush of cold air swept past him. He dropped the bag, spinning around, torch beams stabbing the shadows. Nothing. Only the sound of his own ragged breathing echoed in the heavy silence. Forcing down the rising fear, he continued. He set the trash bag near the door. He scrubbed the table surface vigorously with the cleaning solution he'd bought, trying to erase the waxy residue and the lingering stains. The chemical fumes mingled unpleasantly with the barn's inherent strangeness. After a while, the combined odors became overwhelming. He needed air. Locking the barn securely, he placed the trash bag in the bed of his truck and circled the building's exterior once more. The walls looked ordinary. Old wood, weathered but solid. No hidden panels, no apertures large enough for ingress. Everything appeared as it had upon purchase. He paused, listening intently. Only the soughing wind in the pines answered. The sun dipped lower, painting the clouds in somber shades of grey. Inside the house, he attempted to eat. His appetite had vanished, but he forced down a dry sandwich. His hands shook as he poured a glass of water, his mouth persistently dry. He found himself repeatedly glancing towards the windows, half expecting a lurking figure in the twilight. Nothing moved beyond the swaying trees. He told himself it was done. The altar was dismantled, the candles destroyed, the bowl emptied and cleaned. It had to be over. He tried leafing through an old magazine, but his thoughts inevitably drifted back to the barn, to the weeping walls and the swirling herbs. The idea of keeping vigil all night surfaced, but exhaustion weighed heavily upon him. Eventually, leaving a lamp burning in the hallway, he dragged himself to bed. Sleep was a battlefield. He tossed and turned, haunted by phantom sounds. The scuff of boots on packed earth, the sharp strike of a match, the soft hiss of a wick catching flame. He woke abruptly near dawn, drenched in cold sweat. The house was quiet, but his nerves screamed. Fingers twitching, he pulled on his boots. He grabbed the torch, and on impulse, a heavy iron crowbar leaning against the wall before heading outside. The pre-dawn light cast long spectral shadows across the yard. His breath plumed in the chill air. He trudged through the dew-laden grass, pausing at the barn door, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs, a familiar tightness seizing his chest. He unlocked the door and swung it wide. The potent stench of burnt wax and bitter herbs slapped him in the face, thicker, more suffocating than ever. There, on the makeshift table, the candles stood arranged in their circle, all lit, burning brightly. He froze, his grip tightening convulsively on the cold metal of the crowbar. The same dark wooden bowl sat in the center, filled once more with the viscous, murky liquid. It was as if he had never touched anything, as if his efforts the previous day had been utterly erased. The moisture on the walls was heavier still, dripping audibly, dense veils of steam floating near the high ceiling. Panic, sharp and metallic, flooded his mouth. The barn felt sentient, pulsing with a secret life he couldn't comprehend. His vision swam momentarily with shock. His body felt flushed and hot despite the morning chill. He took a staggering step inside. The earth floor squished beneath his boots, unnaturally sodden, almost swamp-like. Droplets pattered down the walls with unsettling regularity. His chest felt painfully constricted. He fought to focus, to formulate a plan. Remove it all again? The futility of the thought mocked him. He could see the flames dancing, taunting him, refusing permanent extinguishment. His mind raced, scrabbling for logic where none seemed to exist. He clutched the crowbar, his thoughts reeling. He forced himself to try and slow his breathing, the damp, acrid air burning his lungs. He stood there, indecisive for a moment, contemplating smashing the altar to splinters. A wave of dizziness washed over him. His pulse hammered in his ears. A creeping certainty settled upon him. The barn was watching, waiting. He stared at the candles, their flames flickering, hissing softly. His limbs felt weighted, leaden. He realized he was shaking, his knees weak. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, stinging his eye. He blinked rapidly. He took another step forward, his boots leaving deep, muddy impressions. He gripped the crowbar so fiercely, his knuckles shone white. The bitter perfume of the herbs saturated the air. He thought of the locked doors, the empty yard, the utter absence of any explanation beyond the impossible. The barn felt sealed, a pocket universe operating under its own perverse rules. Swallowing hard against the lump in his throat, Elias lifted the crowbar, preparing to bring its weight crashing down upon the defiant table. His muscles tensed, his heart thundered. In that charged moment, clarity struck. There was no walking away. Something resided here, ancient and tenacious, feeding those inexhaustible flames. Fixing his gaze on the candles, feeling their heat sear into his vision, he took a deep, unsteady breath. Then, with grim determination, he raised the crowbar higher, ready to shatter whatever entity held dominion in this place. The cone of my headlamp sliced the subterranean blackness, revealing a gullet of rock that plunged seemingly without end into the planet's depths. Air, thick as velvet choked with grit, carried the scent of geological time, of secrets coffined in stone. I drew a ragged breath, attempting to tether my galloping heart. This was it, the fabled copper lode, lost to memory, untouched for generations. We stood at its threshold, but some thresholds, I would soon grasp, are sealed for profound reasons. "Elias, are you certain?" Clara's voice, a nervous bird fluttering against the stone, echoed, laced with a volatile mix of exhilaration and dread. I pivoted, my light sweeping across my companions. Clara, Ronan, Lena. Their faces stark alabaster masks under the glare, betrayed a shared anxiety beneath the film of ancient dust that coated everything, everyone down here. "Friends," I began, forcing a resonance into my tone that felt hollow even to me. "Months we've poured into this venture. The maps, the research, retreating now." The unspoken truth resonated louder. Seasoned trekkers we might be, but cave explorers, fledglings at best. This mine shaft, swallowed by a dense curtain of wilderness, existed on no chart we possessed. Serendipity, or perhaps a darker thread of destiny, had guided our boots to its maw. Ronan, ever the anchor of pragmatism in our quartet, shifted his weight. "Elias, the look of this place, it feels precarious. Shouldn't we alert the authorities? Let the professionals assess." A shake of my head. "And forfeit the discovery? Relinquish the credit? We unearthed this vein of history. The first exploration belongs to us." Lena, typically the most circumspect, surprised me with a decisive nod. "Elias speaks sense. An opportunity like this, it might never knock again. I vote we proceed." Clara's uncertainty lingered in her eyes, but after a beat, her shoulders set with resolve. "Agreed. But inseparable, understand. No solitary diversions." The pact sealed, our descent commenced. The tunnel slanted downwards, its ribs formed of aged timber supports that groaned like dying beasts as we passed. Our headlamps threw elongated, capering silhouettes onto the walls, spectral jesters mocking our trespass into this slumbering realm. Deeper we pushed, and relics of the mine's industrious past materialized from the gloom. Corroded pickaxes and shovels lay discarded like forgotten bones. Skeletal mining carts stood frozen, their wheels seized by the rust of a century's neglect. "Extraordinary," Lena breathed, her archaeologist's soul drinking in every nuance. "It's like walking through a tear in time." I couldn't deny it. Despite the suffocating dark, despite the persistent thrum of wrongness deep in my gut, a current of pure discovery surged through me. We were the first souls in 100 years to witness this subterranean tableau. Perhaps an hour into our pilgrimage, the passage bifurcated. Two black maws yawned before us, offering no hint of their destinations. "Which path?" Clara queried, her lamp beam probing first left then right. I unfurled the brittle map retrieved from the town archives. Faded, fractured, its ink barely clinging to the parchment, yet our sole compass. After a moment's scrutiny, my finger traced the leftward tunnel. This route, if this map holds true, it should guide us toward the primary excavation caldera. Onward we pressed, the tunnel constricted, the air growing heavier, dust motes dancing thickly in our lights. A profound silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the crunch of our boots on the gritty floor and the sporadic, echoing drip of unseen water. Suddenly, Ronan froze, so abruptly that Lena collided softly with his back. "Did you perceive that?" His voice was a mere wisp of sound. We stilled, straining against the silence. For a long moment, only the frantic drumming in my own ears filled the void. Then subtly, it registered. A low, visceral vibration, like the growl of distant thunder trapped underground. Likely just the mountain settling, I offered. The words meant as much for my own reassurance as theirs. Forward, we must be nearing the heart. But the vibration intensified as we advanced. Tiny pebbles began to skitter nervously across the tunnel floor. A fine powder sifted down from the unseen ceiling. "Elias," Clara urged, her voice taut with rising panic. I truly believe we should turn back. I was poised to concede when a narrow passage abruptly disgorged us into a cavern of staggering immensity. Our lamps failed to graze the distant walls or the vaulted ceiling, creating the disorienting sensation of standing upon the precipice of an infinite void. "This is it," I whispered, awestruck. "The great chamber." As our vision acclimated, shapes coalesced from the Stygian dark. Colossal, rust-eaten machinery loomed like dormant behemoths. Mounds of rock and tailings formed an otherworldly topography. And there, catching the beam of my lamp with a seductive gleam, ran a thick artery of raw copper embedded in the rock face. We had found it. The mythical mother lode. The miner's elusive phantom. Our elation, however, was brutally ephemeral. The subterranean rumbling, which had subsided into a background hum, suddenly escalated with terrifying force. The very ground beneath us began to shudder violently. "Tremor," Ronan shouted, but a deeper dread gripped me. This wasn't merely tectonic. It was the mine itself, weakened by age, by the crushing weight above, by our own ignorant intrusion, finally surrendering. It was collapsing. "Run!" The word tore from my throat as I spun back towards the tunnel entrance. We scrambled, plunged back into the narrow passage we'd just exited, the rumbling crescendoing into a deafening roar. Stones began to rain down, pebbles at first, then fist-sized chunks, then larger missiles. I heard Lena cry out, a sharp gasp of pain as a rock glanced off her shoulder, but there was no stopping. The tunnel seemed to warp, twisting in configurations I didn't recognize from our inward journey. Had we blundered onto a side passage? The dust billowed so densely now that our headlamps were nearly nullified, creating a blinding, disorienting flicker as we fled. A particularly savage heave threw us all from our feet. Struggling upright, a wave of horror washed over me. I couldn't see the others. Clara, Ronan, Lena. My voice cracked, raw with inhaled grit. "Here," Clara's reply, faint, muffled. Groping towards the sound, one hand plastered to the shuddering rock wall for balance, I found her helping Lena rise. Lena's face was a mess of tears and grime, her arm cradled protectively against her chest. "Ronan," I demanded, the question lodging like ice in my throat. Clara shook her head, her eyes vast pools of terror. No idea. We were separated in the fall. Another violent tremor shook the passage. More rock debris cascaded down. We couldn't linger. "Ronan!" I bellowed one final time, straining to hear anything above the cataclysmic groaning of the collapsing mine. Silence answered. Heart leaden, I seized Clara's hand. "We have to move, now!" We ran, half-sighted, through the disintegrating tunnel. Each footfall felt precarious, each intensifying rumble a potential harbinger of live burial. Just as exhaustion threatened to claim us, a pinprick appeared ahead, a fragile glimmer of natural light. The exit. Summoning a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, we sprinted towards it. Rocks hailed down around us. The entire mine seemed to be shrieking its death agony. We burst from the tunnel mouth into the open air and didn't stop, running until a choking dust cloud was well behind us. Until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to buckle. Turning, we witnessed the hillside convulse, then slump inwards upon itself with a sickening finality, vomiting a colossal plume of dust towards the sky. We stood, raggedly sucking air, smeared with dirt and the blood from countless minor lacerations, alive but profoundly fractured by the ordeal. "Ronan!" Lena wept, clutching her injured arm. He's still in there." The crushing weight of reality descended. 4 had entered that mine, bound by the thrill of the unknown. 3 now stood outside, battered, diminished. As the dust began its slow, mournful settling, a sound cut through the aftermath, making our hearts seize. Coughing, emanating from the vicinity of the obliterated mine entrance. We scrambled back, scarcely daring to breathe, the hope rising within us, and there he was. Ronan, crawling out from beneath the branches of a fallen tree that, by some miracle, had formed a protective cavity against the main force of the collapse. He was caked in dust, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but undeniably alive. We hauled him to his feet, the 4 of us momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by a potent cocktail of relief and residual terror. We had survived, but the margin was terrifyingly thin. The mine, its whispered riches and entombed history, was gone, reburied beneath untold tons of earth and rock. As we limped slowly back towards the world of the living, my thoughts turned to the generations of miners who had preceded us. How many had been claimed by this mountain's insatiable hunger? How many had glimpsed the seductive fire of copper, pushed past the warnings whispered by creaking timbers and shifting earth, only to be consumed? Luck had spared us. We had emerged with our lives, though not unmarked. The quest had irrevocably altered us. We sought adventure, perhaps fortune, but unearthed instead a brutal lesson in the indifference of nature and the fragility of our own existence. The lost copper mine would remain lost, its secrets now guarded more fiercely than ever. And we, the foolhardy interlopers who dared rouse it from its century of sleep, would forever bear the imprint of its dark, suffocating embrace. Some discoveries we now knew with chilling certainty are best left buried. Memory holds the scent of that auction house. Old wood, dry rot, the faint murmur of bargain hunters, adrift in a sea of forgotten belongings. I'd wandered in aimlessly, adrift myself, until my gaze snagged on it. The rocking chair. It huddled in a shadowed corner, flanked by mismatched lamps and forlorn side tables. A forgotten sentinel. Scars marred its timber. The seat cushion bore the ghosts of faded patterns. Yet its essential form, the fluid grace of its curves, arrested me. My hand traced the worn back, fingertips registering the subtle, reassuring grain beneath the varnish. When the bidding commenced, the usual haggler's instinct within me fell silent. A simple, quiet wanting took its place. Before long, it was irrevocably mine. The drive home hummed with a peculiar satisfaction, as though I'd rescued not just furniture, but a fragment of narrative. The auctioneer, handing over the receipt, had mentioned its origins. Some dilapidated farmhouse swallowed by the countryside. Nothing more, though his eyes held a flicker. A knowingness, perhaps, when I'd claimed it. I hadn't pried. Back in my living room, the chair's runners sighed against the floorboards as I nudged it toward the window. It settled there, lending the space a rustic gravitas I hadn't known it lacked. My living room is typically a sanctuary of quietude, a place for contemplation or the passive glow of the television. The first disturbance occurred a few nights after the chair's arrival, deep within the nocturnal hush. Midnight had draped the house in profound silence, the street outside muted. Drifting on the edge of sleep on the sofa, I registered a faint rhythmic complaint, wood against wood like a rusted hinge grieving, slow, insistent, initially dismissed as a branch's tap against the pane or the house's old bones settling. Its measured cadence felt too deliberate. My gaze drifted across the room. The rocking chair stirred. A mere tremor, a subtle sway, yet undeniably animate. I levered myself upright, eyes scanning for a draft, a tremor, any mundane explanation. The window remained sealed, the air utterly still. A frisson of ice traced my spine. The fine hairs on my neck lifted. Crossing the room, I laid a hand upon its back. The wood felt cool, inanimate. The motion ceased the instant my skin made contact. A wave of foolishness washed over me. Perhaps my own movement had vibrated the floorboards. No other logic presented itself. Uneasy but not yet afraid, I retreated to bed, whispering reassurances about the eccentricities of aged timber, the natural expansion and contraction of wood. It was normal. I willed it to be normal. Several afternoons later, seeking to domesticate the object, I settled into the rocker with a mug of coffee. It cradled me adequately, though the cushion felt dense, unyielding. As I leaned back, a peculiar sensation unfurled. The air before me seemed to thin, to chill. Gooseflesh pebbled my arms. My eyes darted seeking a source, but found only familiar walls. Yet the distinct impression of being observed, of unseen eyes fixed on the back of my skull, intensified. My heart gave a startled thump. A swift glance over my shoulder revealed nothing but empty space. The feeling persisted, a tangible pressure, until I set down my cup and rose. The moment I stepped away, the oppressive awareness dissolved. Just nerves, I told myself. An overactive imagination latching onto the unfamiliar. One evening, immersed in a late-night film, The rocker sat in its customary spot, angled towards the television. Around 10:30, the creak returned, soft but distinct in the quiet room. My attention snapped towards it. This time, it wasn't rocking. Instead, it seemed to have pivoted, turned slightly, its gaze fixed unnervingly on the front door. Lamplight caught its curves, casting elongated, distorted reflections on the polished floor. I rose, a knot tightening in my gut, the kind that signals deep-seated wrongness without offering proof. I checked windows, vents, nothing amiss. I stood before the chair, waiting, holding my breath, but it remained stubbornly still. Turning off the television, I went upstairs, sleep a distant prospect. Morning brought resolve. I would dissect the chair's mechanics, unearth the rational cause for its nocturnal wanderings. I examined its legs, joints, the underside, searching for imbalances, hidden springs, anything. Only aged wood, worn connections. Yet, the conviction lingered. It shifted when unobserved. I began to watch it, casting surreptitious glances into the living room at odd hours. Sometimes, its angle seemed subtly altered, other times, unchanged. The uncertainty gnawed, a cold tingling that spread through my chest with each perceived displacement. Later that week, seeking an anchor in the rational, I invited Leo over. He possesses a practiced eye for antiques, a grounded presence. Leo circled the chair, tapped its frame, peered beneath. He delivered a prosaic verdict with a shrug, a standard if old rocker. No secret compartments, no clever contraptions. Perhaps a slightly warped runner prone to minute wobbles on the floorboards. Plausible, yet the explanation felt hollow, failing to soothe the disquiet. Throughout his visit, the chair behaved impeccably. Stillness reigned. No creaks, no inexplicable turns. Doubt crept in. Perhaps I was merely projecting unease onto inert wood. That fragile hope shattered a few nights later. Solitude amplified the house's silence. Past midnight, lights extinguished, my foot on the bottom stair. A soft squeak echoed from the living room. My skin tightened. I froze, listening. Another creak, then a third. The unmistakable cadence of someone rocking, slow and deliberate. Heart hammering against my ribs, breath catching, I fumbled for the light switch. Bathed in sudden illumination, I crept towards the living room doorway, sweat prickling under my arms. Peering around the corner, I saw it. The chair moved. A gentle, persistent back and forth sway, still facing the door. No breeze stirred, no fan's word, only the soft protest of wood flexing with each unseen push. Rooted to the spot, pulse throbbing in my ears, hands slick with cold sweat, I stared at the empty seat, half expecting a form to coalesce. Then abruptly, it stopped. Not a gradual slowing, but a sudden cessation. Frozen mid-rock, silence rushed back in, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. Sleep offered no refuge that night. Every creak of the house became the chair. Every shadow held a potential occupant. Exhaustion clung to me the next morning. Daylight brought a semblance of rationality. It's just a chair. But the feeling evaporated the moment I stepped back inside my own home. The living room felt charged, expectant, though the chair sat exactly where I'd left it. For a time, an uneasy truce held. Takeout eaten distractedly before the television, attempts to unwind, Around 10, the familiar quiet descended, heavy and thick. A reckless impulse surfaced. Confront it, perhaps inhabiting the chair itself would dispel the phantoms of my mind. I settled into its embrace, elbows resting on the worn arms. Minutes passed in unremarkable stillness. Then, the chill returned, brushing my right shoulder like an icy fingertip. My stomach clenched. Ignoring it became impossible as a tightness constricted my chest. The room seemed to darken at the periphery. My breathing grew shallow. The sensation intensified. A presence hovering just beside me, just beyond the veil of sight. My hands clenched the armrests, knuckles white. Heart rate soaring, I bolted upright and retreated to the sofa. Instantly, the tension eased, as if stepping from a walk-in freezer back into temperate air. Relief washed over me, though my back remained damp with perspiration. The true terror arrived several nights later. Midnight approached. As I reached for the television remote, a sudden shocking plunge in temperature seized the room. The air turned sharp, glacial against my skin. My breath hitched. Behind me, a quiet rhythmic squeak began. I turned slowly. In the dim spill of light from the hallway, a figure occupied the rocking chair. An old man, gaunt-armed and stoop-shouldered, clad in attire from another time. He sat rocking back and forth, a slow, measured cadence. My stomach plummeted. My legs turned to water. Frozen, I stared. His face remained indistinct, shadowed, but I could discern the dark hollows of his eyes, fixed intently, eternally, on the front door. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A violent shiver coursed through me. Tears sprang, blurring the impossible sight. A pulse throbbed painfully in my temples. Then, as swiftly as he had materialized, he vanished. The chair continued its motion for 1 beat, 2, then stilled. A choked gasp escaped me, painful in its intensity. My entire body trembled. Hallucination, my mind screamed. I scrubbed at my eyes, but the room swam back into focus, ordinary, unchanged. The door shut tight, the furniture steadfast, silence pressed in, yet the profound chill remained palpable in the air. I fled upstairs, locking my bedroom door, huddling under the glare of the bedside lamp, my thoughts racing, logic failing. I saw him. My gut screamed the truth, my mind refused. Morning light did little to dispel the lingering dread. Downstairs, the chair sat placidly, innocuously. Approaching it cautiously, I reached out. Nothing happened. Yet when my fingers brushed the seat, the wood felt unnaturally cold, colder than the ambient air. My skin crawled. The familiar tightness gripped my chest. I snatched my hand back. That evening, I skirted the living room, confining myself to the kitchen, losing myself in the mundane pages of a magazine. Eventually, the path upstairs necessitated passing the living room doorway. I paused, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The chair was angled towards the door again. Motionless, yet somehow expectant. My pulse drummed in my throat. In the days that followed, a pattern emerged. The chair's activity confined itself to the deep hours, late night, or the cusp of dawn. Sometimes the soft, repetitive creak, a phantom lullaby. Other times, I'd find it turned towards the threshold, a silent wooden watchman. Sitting in it invariably summoned the crawling chill, the sense of being scrutinized. A minute was the most I could bear before needing to escape. Glancing back, scanning corners, retreating upstairs with shoulders hunched against an unseen weight. Each night became a vigil laced with anxiety. Would I see him again? I found myself lingering on the stairs, peering into the darkened living room, straining to catch a sound, a flicker of movement. Occasionally, a faint squeak rewarded my watchfulness, or a draft inexplicably colder than the rest of the house would emanate from the chair's vicinity. My eyes would water, my heart pound. The thought of selling it, discarding it, warred with a stubborn, perhaps foolish, need for understanding. A camera? The thought surfaced, but fear held me back. Fear of capturing definitive proof of the impossible. One evening, mustering courage, I positioned myself on the sofa, directly opposite the chair, a small lamp casting a pool of light between us. I simply watched, waiting. The house ticked quietly around me. My leg jittered, breath shallow, palms damp. After an indeterminate time, the air grew colder. I saw it. A single rock forward, then back. My heart leaped, a heavy thud against my ribs. The rocking continued, perhaps 5 seconds worth, then ceased. Leaning forward, hands gripping the sofa cushions. Braced for more, I waited. Nothing. The chair remained still. Trembling, I extinguished the lamp and retreated to my room, feeling adrift, unmoored. I'm recounting this now because the silence has become unbearable. The chair remains, still near the window, still angled just so. By daylight, it can seem utterly benign, just time-worn wood and faded fabric. But when night deepens, the cold presence returns. I hear the floorboards sigh, the rocker whisper its ghostly rhythm. And sometimes, if I look quickly, unprepared, I catch the briefest impression of that silhouette. The old man, spectral and silent, forever rocking, forever watching the door, waiting. No explanation satisfies. Calling someone feels absurd. A furniture restorer? A psychic? I remain suspended in this strange reality. Few know the tale strains credulity. Yet each night, the tension gathers. I sense the subtle shifts in the living room, and the image burns behind my eyes. An old man, anchored to my home by unseen ties, rocking endlessly, as if lost between worlds, waiting for an arrival that never comes. This is my house now. This is what I live with. And the ending remains unwritten, shrouded in the chilling stillness of the wee hours.